Everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's program titled Media, Politics, and Palestine with anti-war journalist Ryan Wentz. I'm really excited for tonight's program, which is sponsored by Massachusetts Peace Action. Massachusetts Peace Action is a local nonprofit grassroots organization in Massachusetts committed to anti-war activism, building a more peaceful and just foreign policy, abolishing nuclear weapons, redirecting our obscene the money in our Pentagon budget towards human needs such as housing, education, healthcare. So yeah, we're joined tonight by Ryan Wentz, and tonight I'll be co-moderating tonight's discussion along with our co-moderator tonight, named Calla Walsh. Calla is a 17-year-old, really great activist and organizer from Massachusetts. She's worked with Massachusetts Peace Action on campaigns related to Palestine solidarity, US peace with China, and more. She also works on a lot of local organizing and activism related to housing, climate, and a lot more. So with that, Calla, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Amar. I'm really excited for our webinar tonight, and I'm pleased to introduce our guest, Ryan Wentz, to you all. Ryan currently works for Mint Press News, has a background in Palestine solidarity organizing and anti-war activism, and he previously organized with Code Pink and worked for Soapbox. You can find him on Twitter at the username in his Zoom name. And just before we get started, I do want to note that while we will be discussing some contemporary issues in Palestine and Cuba tonight, none of us speaking are Palestinian or Cuban, and we just hope to center the voices of those directly impacted in these countries and not speak over them. But without further ado, thank you so much, Ryan, for joining us, and let's jump into our questions. All right, so just to get started, I want to start with this question because the first thing that pops up when I Google Ryan's name is a Canary Mission page. For those watching who don't know, Canary Mission is an organization dedicated to creating a blacklist of pro-Palestine activists. It's notoriously racist and Islamophobic and targets a lot of people doing really important work to try to undercut their organizing. So Ryan, we wanted to ask, how does it feel to be targeted by what is essentially a doxing or hate group for your activism? And do you commonly face backlash for your activism, especially online?
Thanks for having me, by the way, and thanks for joining, everyone. The answer to that question, I guess, is that of course, I do face a lot of backlash for my opinions online, particularly around Palestine, but regarding other issues as well. But I think that what Canary Mission intends to do is to scare people away from speaking out against, injustice in Palestine and supporting liberation of Palestine. And I think that, I don't even face the worst of it when it comes to, obviously my Palestinian friends and comrades are face a lot more of this backlash and hate. But it does feel extremely weird that there's this Wikipedia-like page that documents all of my past organizing and tweets and with photos of me and with links to people who I know and organizations that I've worked with. So that's very strange, but I think that it kind of demonstrates that the Zionist organizations are very afraid of people who are willing to speak out against Israel's colonial rule in Palestine. And I think that I can't let it get in the way of what I believe and using my voice to speak out against these things, because it's all too common in the West, in the US especially, for people to be afraid to touch the issue. And it's gone on for way too long. And for a really long time, it's just been Palestinians primarily who've been speaking out, and the world's just been watching. So I think it's really important for people in the imperial core to use their voices to condemn these atrocities that are happening every day that our government is actively funding.
Yeah, that's right. We completely agree with all of that. And so I wanted to ask you, because related to this, related to your activism for Palestine, you made a tweet online, I think a few months ago, and it led to this whole series of events where ultimately the California Highway Patrol, I believe, visited you at your house. Is that right? So can you, for the people with us tonight, could you tell us, like, what happened? What did you tweet, and how did that end up leading to the police visiting your house?
Right. So in April, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was on a live stream with I forget what organization this man was working for, but with a Zionist organization that, kind of just masqueraded as like a Jewish New York organization. But his questions to AOC were obviously like framed the issue in kind of this liberal Zionist framework of how do Israelis and Palestinians live in peace together, without addressing the meat of the issue, which is settler colonialism. And I found a clip from this live stream after I watched the whole thing, and in which AOC gave a very like mealy-mouthed answer, where she just kind of went on for over 2 minutes without addressing the crux of the issue. And I just said, gave a little background about what the live stream was, and then said that it was an incredibly underwhelming response, to say the very least. That's all I said. And then 24 hours later, I was at my apartment in LA, and two plainclothes California Highway Patrol officers were shouting my name over the fence. And I walked up to them thinking that it was a Postmates order. And then they showed me their badges, and they were legit, and they asked if they could come inside. And I obviously said no, but I would talk with them outside. And so I did, and they right off the bat accused me of threatening to kill a sitting member of Congress, which was so insane to hear. And I, they didn't initially say who it was, but then they said that, I tweeted at AOC, and I had tagged her in the tweet. So there's a kernel of truth there, but I in no way threatened to kill her. I just said that it was an underwhelming response. And then they interrogated me, like asked me a bunch of really personal questions about where my family lives, my mental health, if I'm a quote unquote political person, a bunch of really invasive questions. And obviously I didn't answer any of them, and just said that I needed a lawyer with me. But it went on for maybe 10 minutes, and then they left me with their card, and I never heard from them again. But then the next morning, I guess Glenn Greenwald got in touch with the Capitol Police, because they said that they were there on behalf of the Capitol Police. And the Capitol Police changed the story and said that it wasn't me who made the threat, but rather it was someone in my replies on Twitter who had. And I looked through my replies and I didn't see anything. Obviously, Twitter could have maybe like flagged that and removed it, but I don't really think that. I think they just changed the story after it blew up in their face, because that's a really slippery slope if suddenly I'm responsible for every reply to my tweets. That's just like absurd to pin that on me, because I can't control these people and I have a public page. So it was just a really alarming experience. I'm still kind of paranoid because of it, because it was so baseless. It wasn't even like I did what they said. So it was a wild experience. But I think it just goes to show that, pro-Palestine speech is like among the most censored forms of speech in the US. There are plenty, I think in 30 states, there are anti-BDS laws in place that criminalize boycotting Israel. And I know so many Palestinian activists in the US who've had like the FBI show up at their house, or other, federal officers. So I think it's not like, as much as it was a traumatic and bizarre experience for me, it's not about me, and it's more about the issue. And it just kind of proves my point that everyone, like people in the US, are intimidated into like shutting up about this issue. And so we need to do the opposite.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm sorry you went through that, because I remember listening to you talk about it in different outlets, and you were saying how like it felt scary. So and like we can understand why. But you're right that it's about the underlying issue here, that there's something deeper going on, and at the crux of what happened here was, as you worded it, an underwhelming comment from AOC in regards to the substantive issue. So I have a question. As I said in the beginning, that Massachusetts Peace Action, we want a peaceful foreign policy. That's what we work towards. We do a lot of different things towards that end. And one of them is congressional lobbying. We want to meet with our congressional representatives and ask them to sponsor, pro-peace legislation, and not sponsor the pro-war legislation. So when it comes to the progressives in Congress, people like AOC, for example, there's a couple different views here. There's one view that where they say that these are our allies in Congress, and they're the ones closest to us politically. We should rally around them. We should support them, even when they do things that are underwhelming, as you put it. We shouldn't call them out because it could weaken them politically. It could help Republicans. It could help more conservative Democrats. So that's one point of view. Another point of view is that when they're doing things that are not supportive of the pro-peace policies we support, it's our job to hold them accountable, essentially, because if we don't, who else will? And there are representatives. So what's your view on this?
It's a good question. I think that my view is that I tend to look at it through the eyes of the people who are actually bearing the brunt of these foreign policy decisions. So, Palestinians living under Israeli occupation, do you think that they, like people who are having their homes demolished, do you think that they want American so-called allies to be soft on politicians when their homes are about to be demolished, or when their children are being shot, or when, there's just like, and it's across the board on all of these issues, not just Palestine, but sanctions on Venezuela or Iran, or any number of countries. I think that it's super important that we inside the US are extra vocal, because we aren't about to have our homes demolished and we aren't about to have US bombs dropped on us, or to be starved by US sanctions. So I think it's really important that while I do think that there are certain things, I guess, that people in Congress do that I can acknowledge are like valuable, I think that just because they kind of brand themselves as like progressive or left wing doesn't mean that we should give them the benefit of the doubt, because at the end of the day, it's all coming at the expense of people in the global South. And if you actually, care about solidarity with people living under the boot of the U.S. empire, then I think that it's really important to have that kind of guide your analysis and your strategy. If that makes sense.
Totally on board with you on that. I think a lot of this rhetoric centers Americans too much, and it's frustrating to see people, justifying progressives voting for Iron Dome funding because, oh, they need to leverage it for a climate bill, when that's not what someone who is facing a bombing, who's facing settler colonialism, is necessarily thinking about, political leverage. And like you said, I think a lot of this rhetoric has been very confused by the corporate media, and we've been sort of locked in this Overton window of Trump good, everyone else bad, Trump bad, everyone else good, everyone who's not Trump is good, and Americans aren't really looking at our foreign policy through a critical lens. So I wanted to ask, how do you think the Democratic Party, mainstream media, even mainstream progressives have shifted their criticisms of imperialist US foreign policy under Biden from those under Trump? And why is Biden garnering much less outrage when he continues many of the same atrocities from the previous administration?
I think that honestly, a lot of the criticisms that Democrats had of Trump were totally unrelated to foreign policy. I think they were on board with a lot of his foreign policy decisions. I think, I remember when Trump bombed Syria, Fareed Zakaria said that that's when Trump really became president, because he showed the world what American values look like. When Brian Williams also said that, he was guided by the beauty of our weapons. So I think that that's just people in the corporate media, but in Congress, for instance, Democrats, most Democrats voted for all of Trump's military budget increases, and, hopped along on Trump's coup in Venezuela, placed their support behind Juan Guaido. Most of them didn't have a problem with, save for a couple progressives, most of them didn't have a problem with the sanctions that we've placed, that Trump imposed on Venezuela, that according to CEPR killed 40,000 people in 1 year alone. So, and then when it comes to his policies as it relates to Palestine, most Democrats, didn't vocally oppose Trump there either. So I think that, they maybe criticized him. Their criticisms, for the most part, were from the right. They said that Trump didn't go hard enough against Russia, or they criticized him for, quote unquote, sending love letters to Kim Jong-un just because he wanted to meet with Kim Jong-un. Like, I just don't think that their criticisms were carried much weight. I don't think that they were very valuable. I think that for the most part, they were fully in support of Trump's foreign policy. They may have had problems with more like domestic issues. And then, now I think that Biden has kind of proved that point, in that he still hasn't rejoined the Iran nuclear deal, which it seemed like was a given when he was elected. He is still trying to force Juan Guaido down Venezuela's throat. He has imposed even more sanctions on Cuba. He is fanning the flames of the Cold War with China. So yeah, he maybe withdrew troops from Afghanistan, but I just don't really see much of a difference when it comes to, Trump may have been a little more shameless in the things that he would say, that he would tweet, or that he would say in interviews, like when he admitted that we were in Syria to steal oil. But I just don't think that the differences are that substantial, really.
Thanks for that response. I think, like you mentioned, Cuba, that's another great example of the Biden admin's foreign policy, not significantly improving from Trump's administration on the issue of Cuba, in fact, worsening and not even returning to Obama's slightly less hostile approach. Right now, the US is backing pro-democracy protests in Cuba while also having a history of overthrowing democratically elected leaders in Latin America and installing dictators to protect US financial interests. So in light of the protests that took place yesterday, actually, I'll say, how is the US trying to create an illusion of opposition from within Cuba to the revolutionary government? How can we, as anti-imperialist organizers, counter this Pentagon propaganda and stand in true solidarity with Cubans?
To stand in true solidarity with Cubans, I think that we need to demand that the US government lift the blockade. It's been going on for far too long, and it's so upside down when all of these Biden officials, put out tweets or statements saying that they support the Cuban people as they're, squeezing their economy more and more, and illegally occupying a part of Cuban land to operate a torture camp. That doesn't make any sense. And that, is the same rhetoric that US officials have used time and time again to intervene abroad. The humanitarian interventionism brand of American imperialism, where you feign concern for human rights or a lack of democracy elsewhere, and then use that to manufacture consent to wage war, whether that's an economic war or a conventional war. But yeah, I mean, the more you read about these patterns, the more clear it becomes that the US is never interested in promoting democracy. That's just the primary excuse that US officials use to intervene, to install a government that bows down to the US empire, and that plays ball by the imperialist rule. So I think that it's just really important for people to see through all of this propaganda, and to understand that these US officials are not acting in good faith, because I understand if you're not well read on the issues, they're tugging at your heartstrings. The corporate media is good at that. They make it seem like there's all of these defenseless people who are just being crushed by this evil dictatorship that hasn't done anything for the people, as if the Cuban government hasn't, sent doctors all around the world to overexploited countries for free, whereas we send soldiers and bombs. The Cuban government provides healthcare for its people. We can't say the same. And so I think that it's just particularly egregious when the State Department brings up repression and arbitrary detention when Guantanamo Bay, the camp there, is still operating. It's just extremely hypocritical and disingenuous. And I think that what people here can be doing is learning and educating themselves about these issues, because the way that we build a strong movement is through knowledge and understanding. And the corporate media does a really good job of preventing that from happening.
Yeah, we totally agree. And that's actually good segues well into some questions I wanted to ask about the media. And because there's a couple things I'm trying to ask here. On one hand, there's this legacy corporate mainstream media, whatever you want to call it. Then on the other hand, people like Kala and myself and other people are starting to get more and more information from people like you and from online and different resources. So, but at the same time, even though there's more platforms and stuff online, a lot of it is still going through big tech like Google and Facebook. So I'm not sure what my questions are here, but what are your thoughts? Can you comment on some of these media dynamics?
Yeah, I think that it's great that there's more and more critical media coming out. But yeah, as you said, Silicon Valley is an arm of the US empire, and they're constantly removing these accounts, large accounts that are committed to presenting an alternative view of the world, really. And they just, without any notice, will remove pages from Facebook, especially like Palestinian pages and Chavista pages out of Venezuela, and just accounts and creators that are critical of global capitalism and US imperialism. And it's really daunting to really see what we're up against, because it's an enormous beast that feels oftentimes like impossible to not just defeat, but challenge in the first place, when you have no way to get your message across because all of these giant tech companies are shutting you down. But I do think that like a lot of people in my generation, a lot of young people are being exposed to more of this type of content that is, a lot of people are very reluctant to dive into, because it kind of shatters your worldview, which is a very uncomfortable and sometimes painful experience, because you have to do a lot of reflecting, and most of the time you kind of come to the conclusion that you were just lied to as a child, by everyone in authority, whether it was the media or your teachers or your parents. Like, that's not a good feeling. So I understand the reluctance, but I think that more and more people who have grown up in an age where like the US has always been at war, the climate is deteriorating, there's still a global pandemic going on, the economic conditions are dire, and people are more, because of all of those factors, I think that young people have become increasingly receptive to this type of media. So what was the first part of your question? I feel like I kind of answered the last part.
The first part was just commenting on how there's large corporate control of like our legacy media. It's like corporate media.
Yeah, I think it's really important for people to understand that. So many people are hesitant to eat food that's made in a factory farm, right? So that's like corporate food. So why are you consuming corporate media? It's just as toxic, and it's just as like it pollutes your mind. And also understanding how the media functions, like with so many of these giant outlets, the writers are at the same time like fellows at think tanks in DC that have really close ties to the national security state, or like weapons companies, or funded by weapons companies, these think tanks. And yeah, I mean, today I saw some Thomas Friedman piece in the New York Times that said that like, to save the planet, we need more Elon Musks. So if that doesn't speak to the nature of corporate media, I really don't know what does.
Well, that all really resonates with me. I think especially as a young person, who I think in my experience, once I started, consuming different media sources and following people who I trusted on these issues and who I knew were reporting in good faith and actually on the ground in the countries on which they were reporting, I think that's really when my ideology and my worldview began to change. But certainly when I first became interested in politics and current events, I was not consuming those sources. And most of my news I was getting from the New York Times, from NPR, and very few other outlets. So I wanted to ask if you have any advice to young people on how to consume media, how to be media literate, and any sources in particular that you might recommend.
Yeah, I think that media literacy is really like the most important first step, becoming media literate, because then you're able to identify how these narratives are spun. And if you aren't able to do that and you like skip that step, then I really think that it's hard to make sense of things. So I think that one of the things that I've done that's extremely helpful is gone back in time, and I've read a bunch of articles, op-eds leading up to or directly after 9/11, for instance, and that were published in the early days of the War on Terror. And I've realized that so many of these propagandists who have blood on their hands are still in like part of this media apparatus. They face no consequences. They lied over and over again. They are like incredibly racist and believe in this like American exceptionalist myth that that kind of frames the world, the entire world, just as our backyard, not just Latin America, but the entire world. And as if we have a right to be patrolling everywhere. So many of these outlets report like hysterically on Iran being like in the Persian Gulf or China being in the South China Sea. But then when the US is in the Persian Gulf or the South China Sea, it's crickets. So what does that say? That says that the countries that literally are on these bodies of water shouldn't be there. But who does have a right to be there is the United States, which is thousands and thousands of miles away. So I think that it has really helped me going back in time, because I was so young when 9/11 happened, when the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq happened. I kind of wanted to understand that time period more to beef up my analysis and strengthen my understanding of how this apparatus works, and just to see with my own eyes like how bloodthirsty and how pro-war these media outlets are. The New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Economist, all of these outlets that I was raised thinking are the most respectable, and prestigious. Like, I really thought that the New York Times was the paper of record at one point. And I think that it has been really refreshing finding sources that report critically on these issues. I know everyone kind of has a different medium that they like consuming. So like for videos, my good friend Abby Martin makes the Empire Files videos, which definitely played a really central role in my like political development. I think that there's some great podcasts out there, one that really focuses on like media criticism that I can think of is Citations Needed. That's a really, really good podcast that covers a bunch of these topics. And Blowback, the podcast, the first season was about Iraq and the second is about Cuba. that has been a really valuable resource for me. There's really good, they add like really good media clips in there. And then reading news, I mean, Twitter is like the main place, just like I have a lot of people who I respect that I'm following, you know, and they're like following their accounts has definitely educated me tremendously. I think that some like websites that do good work, let's see. There's different websites that I've like learned different things from. I know some of their coverage is sometimes iffy, but Jacobin sometimes has good stuff. I've, you know, learned a lot from Gray Zone reports, from Consortium News, Covert Action Magazine. Yeah, there's just a number. I feel like I need to think about that a little more, but there's really a lot of people doing a lot of great work, which is, you know, an encouraging sign. But as you were saying before, as we both were saying before, it's hard to count on these things when we know that like big tech is clamping down more and more. It almost feels like there's a like time's running out for all of these sources. And Mint Press, as I can't believe I forgot that, Mint Press News, where I work, has great reporting on issues related to the U.S. empire. But yeah, I definitely am like encouraged, but feel like who knows when they're gonna pull their next move.
Yeah, right. So there's a lot to unpack there, and I want to talk about, but I want to read a question off from the chat here. Alex is asking, how do we raise awareness in the American public? What have you found as a most effective way for people to consider what they know is not true, to even question their beliefs?
Great question. I think that making like personal connections, obviously it shouldn't have to be that way, but that is pretty effective. Like if someone, you know, you can really connect like imperialism to every issue. So if someone is in medical debt, for instance, you like, I always insist that these people know that they deserve better because they're being screwed over and that's not fair and they deserve more. And like building people up, because this like capitalist system that we live under really just tears us down and makes us feel like worthless and alienated and depressed, and like we can't do anything to change it. And so like I just tell people that they deserve more, but that so much of that money is being funneled into the Pentagon, and we don't benefit whatsoever from these like imperialist assaults all over the world. You know, I can't tell you like what the invasion of Iraq did for me. Like obviously it like benefited multinational corporations, and obviously imperialism props up our like way of life in the US. So in that sense, it's all like my life in a sense has been lived at the expense of these people that the US is like terrorizing actively. But I think that we like need to understand that we have way more in common with ordinary people abroad than we do with the elites here that are waging these wars, that are making the decisions, because they're really the ones who more than anyone else are benefiting. And I think that, you know, like it's a tough position to be in, like the place that we're all in, because we kind of feel like we need to connect the dots for other people. but I think that it's also a really incredible position to be in, because this is like the only way we're gonna like win is if we get through this. And it's kind of like we have such a responsibility to change people's hearts and minds and to educate people about these things that they're totally like intentionally misled to believe. And I think that to respond directly to the first part of the question, how do we raise awareness? Like challenging the fundamental view of American exceptionalism, I think, is so crucial. Like letting people know that we have 4%, I think, of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prisoners, but we're the land of the free. You know, challenging all of these ridiculous cliches that we hear all the time, from Hollywood movies to talking heads on CNN, to our teachers, to our grandparents, to everyone, you know, like we have been lied to, and just letting people know that like you're there to kind of walk them through it, because it does feel very alienating and scary once you reach that position and you kind of dive into the deep of like, whoa, there were so many myths that I was fed as a young kid and that have shaped my worldview for decades. And now I feel like I need to relearn the entire world. Like that's a very scary position to be in. But what's scarier is being a zombie that like doesn't think critically and that just like licks the boots of this military machine.
That was a really powerful response. So thank you for that. And I do want to touch, we have a couple more media questions, and I wanted to touch on something that we've mentioned a couple of times tonight, but not really gone into depth with, and that is the specifics of social media. I think we've seen recently with movements like the Black Lives Matter movement, like the uprisings in Sheikh Jarrah and the subsequent worldwide protests in solidarity with Palestine, that social media can really mobilize people and change people's perception of events and counter these corporate media narratives, especially for young people who may not be as aware of these issues. But it also has its own dangers. You know, some people will just think reposting is enough and not actually take tangible actions to improve people's material conditions or challenge people in power. So my question is, what are the potential powers and limits of social media activism, and how do you think the left should engage with social media to mobilize people, to educate people, while also ensuring that social media use isn't the extent of our activism?
It's a really good question, and I think something that I wrestle with all the time, because as you said, like it's one of the only ways, like channels that we can go through to get information out. Like I'm not going to be invited on to MSNBC ever. You know, I'm never going to be, I'll never be able to get published in the New York Times or the Washington Post. Like, of course not. So it's incredibly valuable to have this like place, this cyberspace where like we can actually get information out to people. And I also think though, because it is just this like cyber area, it's not, I do think it's real, but it's not, as you said, like you're not addressing the material conditions in people's lives. So I think that social media is an effective way to mobilize people, like to kind of light the fire beneath them to get them like to be active and to care about issues and to understand them more thoroughly. But I do think that it's not the end all be all, and you have to go out into the world and fight for those issues, like offline as well. So, and I'm not saying everyone has to have the same role, you know, there's in social movements, people have different roles. Some people are more online, they're more committed to getting that information out. Some people want to be on the front lines of the struggle and you know, leading chants and putting their bodies on the line. So I think that like it's not totally necessary for one person to commit to like fully embracing both roles. But I do think that people need to understand that that like both are extremely valuable ways to make a difference. And yeah, I think a lot of people kind of like look down on social media sometimes. They're like, oh, like go touch grass or whatever. And I think that that's kind of dismissive, because as you said before, like a lot of these movements that have really caught the world's attention have been like their messages have been spread through social media. So it's definitely extremely valuable, but we do need to be cautious about who actually runs it, and also the way that you know, the like US imperialists have weaponized these platforms as well. For instance, leading up to the coup in Bolivia, like a network of fake bot accounts were created that all put out the same tweets, like identical tweets about Evo Morales being a dictator, and like these brave pro-democracy activists, you know, just yearning for freedom. And so they also are skilled at getting their messages out through these networks. And I think that that's something to keep in mind as well. Like there are, the US government is very, very good at like in waging information wars.
Yeah, that's right. And you know, social media, like for example, this discussion we're having tonight, we're going to put it on our social media so that we can hopefully reach more people with our message of peace, justice, media literacy, etc. But at the same time, something we've all alluded to tonight and spoken about a little bit is the monopoly power of big tech over social media. And as you were mentioning, how Facebook, for example, is notorious for kicking off like banning like Palestinian accounts. And and that's just one example. There's so many examples of big tech, or they banned they shut off the Mappa account for a little bit, and we didn't know if we were going to get it back. But anyways, that's happening. The question, one thing I'm concerned about because of all this is I've been seeing a lot of liberals and left people and progressives who, in the name of opposing the right wing, they're doing what I perceive to be essentially empowering big tech, like asking big tech to exercise further power to ban like dangerous right wingers from social media. But I'm concerned about that because I think that sort of thing always comes back to be used against the left, even more so. So are you concerned about that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. I think it's really dangerous and unsettling to hear these calls coming from people. I know some progressives in Congress in the aftermath of the Capitol riots were advocating for increased censorship on social media. And that I genuinely think that was a big part of why I was visited by California Highway Patrol officers because they were sent by the Capitol Police. And I think that the Capitol Police were, looking out, like were extra vigilant after the Capitol riot. So I think that, as you said, the big tech censorship will always be targeted more so at the left, because the left is who actually poses an existential threat to US imperialism and global capitalism. These right-wingers aren't threatening these like systems whatsoever. They actually want to strengthen them. And the center is has a lot of contempt for the left. And I think that they want to preserve the US empire as well, So I think that it's really dangerous to advocate for increased censorship. Not that I'm like a free speech absolutist by any means, but I do think that I think that a lot of it comes down to people not understanding the fact. I think that they kind of believe that these big tech companies are acting in good faith and that they don't have these ideological motives to shut down accounts on the left. I think that they just think that they're unbiased people. It's like the same way that people view the corporate media, they're just unbiased, they are fair, and they don't have a hand in anything. They're just doing what's right. And I think that that leads people to be trusting in these giant, powerful corporations. And I just don't think that it's going to end well for the left if people continue advocating for those types of policies.
Great. Okay, cool. I think Cal has a question, but I want to, we're going to start to get ready to wrap up tonight's program. So I have a quick question here. I just want to put in here just because I'm curious. What are some of your favorite books that have been formative in your education, and also what are you reading any books now? What are you reading right now?
I would say, okay, so when it comes to Palestine related stuff, I know he's not a Palestinian author, but Ilan Pappé wrote The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. And that book is just a very comprehensive record of how Zionists have, or initially ethnically cleansed Palestine and have been, carrying out these policies for decades. I think that Freedom is a Constant Struggle by Angela Davis is very valuable for connecting how, the carceral state in the US is linked to the occupation of Palestine. I think that Capitalist Realism by Mark Fisher was really eye-opening to me. It kind of provided the language that I had been searching for about capitalism's impact on mental health. And let's see, I'm reading The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon right now. I think How Europe Underdeveloped Africa is a really good text for people to understand these global dynamics at play and how the West has been pillaging the rest of the world for centuries. Let's see, anything else that I'm forgetting? There's a lot that I want to read as well. I've heard that The Open Veins of Latin America is great when it comes to understanding the history of colonialism and imperialism across Latin America. But yeah, those are some ones that stand out to me.
That is a great list. Half of the ones that you mentioned are also on my very long to read list. Great. And we also wanted to ask before we wrap up, are there any projects you're working on right now or work that you're particularly excited about that you'd want to share with us or that people could potentially tap into?
So at Mint Press, I started a month ago, and I have been working a lot on like the video side of things. So Loki, the rapper and activist, he's amazing. He has like a video, he has a podcast, but it also has a video component. So I've been working on some of that stuff. It's called the Watchdog. And then we also have another like video series called Mintcast that I've been working on as well. And then we're gonna start, yeah, I'm really excited to start putting out like monthly videos that will be like narrated and will cover specific topics, like an in-depth dive into sanctions, I think is something that we're looking at doing in the coming months. And also we're working on something about like how Democrats and Republicans agree pretty much for the most part on support for Israel, but how Democrats try to like speak out of both sides of their mouths. And how, but even though they all like attend AIPAC and are funded by these pro-Israel organizations, they try to, you know, did you see that video of Chuck Schumer being, someone confronted him and was like, do you support the home demolitions or something? And he's just like, I support a two-state solution. I support a two-state solution. It's just kind of a way that they can dodge the actual question. But yeah, I'm really excited for what I'm doing there, and just look forward to getting more stuff out there. So stay tuned for sure.
That all sounds awesome. Well, we have come to the end of our webinar, but I just want to thank you so much again, Ryan, for joining us. I learned a lot. I think it's more important than ever to be having these conversations about media literacy in the 2020s as just the corporate monopoly on media grows and grows. And yeah, information is power, knowledge is power, language is power. And so it's really important to be thinking about the connections between what we're consuming and all the existing superstructures and power dynamics in our country. I'll definitely drop Twitter profile link in the chat so people can check out their account right now. But any final words, Ryan, before we wrap up?
I just really appreciate everyone for tuning in, and I encourage everyone to just keep educating themselves and keep, you know, talking to people, having these discussions with people, because so like people abroad are fighting these struggles every day, and like the least we can do from here is to like engage in them. So yeah, I just really appreciate what you all are doing. So keep it up.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ryan, for joining us, and thank you, everyone, for spending your time with us tonight. So this discussion was recorded. We'll send out an email to everyone who registered for this event with the recording of the discussion and some links where people can follow Ryan if they want to. So thanks again, everyone, so much for joining us tonight, and everyone, please have a great night.